Welcome to Taking the Edge Off the Middle East, a series of casual conversations offering up rare insider knowledge about the most important events in the Middle East and the world, and why it all matters to America today. I'm Brian Katulis. I'm host of the podcast, and I'm a senior fellow here at the Middle East Institute. We're recording here at our Middle East Institute headquarters. Please come by and visit us. We've got a terrific art exhibition that opened in September, and we're doing a lot of great policy work, and we'd love to hear from you. Subscribe to the podcast. Please send comments. Follow us on all your various social media platforms. I'm super happy about today's conversation today because not only are we talking to a very distinguished policy expert and a man with political experience over successive political campaigns, but a dear friend of mine, Doug Wilson, who is former Assistant Secretary of Defense for Public Affairs, the Pentagon senior spokesman and communications strategist during Obama's first term. But I've known Doug for a long period of time. Doug, welcome to MEI, and let's take some edge off the Middle East.
Thank you very much. And I have to say, Brian, for whatever I've done in my career, I have never had a mug with my face on it.
Branded mug.
I have never had a branded mug. I mean, that doesn't mean my mug hasn't appeared elsewhere, but my face has never appeared on the mug. So I'm toasting to you, and I'm also toasting to that fantastic shirt you've got.
Okay, we can talk about that later. Yeah.
All right.
Yes. Yeah. No, this is actually a shirt. It says, too sweet to be sour, too nice to be mean. It's a lyric from a Beastie Boys song. And my brother-in-law, Andrew Graham, makes these T-shirts. He lives in Great Barrington, Massachusetts, but he makes these T-shirts that are pretty good Barrington T-shirts. And last year, he made Make America Pretty Good Again. T-shirts, which are pretty funny.
So Larry David line.
Yeah, thanks. Well, welcome to the new MEI. We're doing lots of fun stuff here.
You are, and I have to tell you, the fact you're wearing that shirt, the fact I'm toasting you with your mug, with a picture on your mug, just kind of underscores for me that MEI is a different place than a lot of the think tanks. I know think tanks are fighting for relevance now. I don't think you have to fight for relevance. I think you have assembled an amazing team. I follow it. I follow your podcasts, and I will do a second toast to you on the organization that sponsors you.
Thanks for saying that, Doug. We're really proud of what we're doing here at MEI. And again, like I said, check us out. Doug, I don't even know where to start because I've known you for a long period of time. In addition to your position at the Pentagon, you were a top national security advisor on presidential campaigns, essentially from Gary Hart in 1984.
That's right.
Dating you.
Correct.
All the way up to Pete Buttigieg in 2020.
Correct.
So we're going to talk about a lot of things on the podcast today. We're going to talk about what's going on in the world right now. We're going to talk about the Democratic Party, which you and I have been a part of in those discussions. Right. We're going to talk policy, politics, and of course, we're going to cover the Middle East and your career. And we're going to do it all in about an hour.
That's about how long it'll take.
Yeah. No, and everybody should tune into this thing because Doug has a lot of wisdom about what's going on in the world now and where we should go next. I want to start out with where we are now. This episode is coming out basically 8 months into the Trump 2.0 administration. What do you think he's doing on foreign policy? What's different this time around? Is it qualitatively different than his first term? What are the 2 or 3 things that are different from previous administrations here?
Everything's different. Everything's different, and it's not just from previous administrations, but this is an inflection point in our history.
Yeah.
We have never seen a president who is this focused on himself and his own results and his own position and where he wants to go in our lifetime. Certainly not in mine, and I'm way older than you and most of the people in this room.
Yeah.
I couldn't tell you what his foreign policy is, but I could tell you what has changed in foreign policy as a result of the last 7 months and the kinds of things that a lot of us, particularly in our party, are not thinking about, but we need to think about because they're staring us in the face. The first one is from now on, how do we deal with autocrats? Is dealing with autocrats based on our values, Or is it based on some kind of personal relationship where you accept certain things about autocracy in order to get certain things that you want? Yeah. We're seeing this in domestic politics as well. Of our two major parties, one of them is completely co-opted by this president. There is no dissension. In autocracies, gradually, there is no dissension. Yeah. Even today, as we're recording this, we had the hearing from Robert F. Kennedy
on Capitol
Hill on the health issues for which he has scared one hell of a lot of people, including the doctors who are Republicans in Congress.
Right.
But none of them will cross the line saying, I'm sorry that I voted for him and you're making me very nervous. They will edge up to it.
Yeah.
That hasn't happened in other administrations. During the Iraq War, you had Republicans and Democrats oppose it.
Right.
Even during President Biden's presidency, when Ukraine was front and center, you had people who weren't afraid to say no. They weren't supportive of various parts of the policy.
Yeah.
So here you have an administration which is completely dominated by one party, and the party is dominated by one person, and the opposition party cannot get traction.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with autocrats? Because what we're watching is this president dealing with people like Putin, saying that his personal relationships are going to get results. And we're seeing the show, but we're seeing no results.
Yeah, there's nothing as a result of these initiatives.
There's nothing there to show.
Right.
We're seeing the tariffs. We're seeing a country like India starting to wonder, is it worth being part of a Quad?
Right.
What's the relationship worth? We're seeing China on the rise, and in the Middle East, it's very interesting. There have been a couple of what I consider to be moves that, because he is so unpredictable and so self-obsessed, have actually turned out to be rather interesting. I will be probably the minority of one here to say that the air attack on the nuclear facilities in Iran accomplished one thing. They accomplished the fact that when you doubt whether or not the United States is willing to use force, you now have an example of maybe it will.
Right, yeah.
I think that's more relevant to Taiwan than what's going on in Ukraine at the moment. But what did we actually accomplish there? We probably set back the nuclear program. Who knows what?
Right.
I mean, if it doesn't match what Trump has said, you're fired, as we've seen, at the Pentagon. But Gaza into a Riviera, displacing all the Palestinians.
We'll get into that, and we'll talk about the Middle East in a second. I want to stay on the bigger picture for a second and say something, reflect something that you just said. Essentially, the main quality that Trump has on his team that he looks for senior management is loyalty.
Correct.
To his word. And you see in the cabinet meetings, there's actually a section where everybody praises him in the way that he likes to hear, right?
It's not a section. It's the whole meeting. The whole meeting is that.
Yeah. And why is that bad for America? Draw that out. Tell us why.
Why is it bad for America? It's a good question. I'd put it differently. It's essentially just reinforcing what it is we have as a leader of this country. You and I have talked a lot about aspiration. We have talked a lot about how for decades, at least my entire lifetime up until January of 25, the United States was seen as a country for which millions of people saw it as a goal.
Yeah, that's why they're trying to get here, right?
They're trying to get here. They believed us. They trusted our values. They thought that when there were floods or earthquakes or hurricanes or whatever, we would be there. They thought that when their fellow citizens were being put in prison for speaking out truths about the country, we would be by their side.
Yeah.
They thought that when their people were sick, they weren't being fed, they were looking to build a better future. America was the model.
Yeah.
So this is the second difference, and I think maybe the most important difference in foreign policy now is that we are no longer the aspirational goal of millions of people in the world. I think many, many, many people who had the beliefs about America was the place to go and where they wanted to what they wanted to aspire to, the standards they wanted to achieve. Now they don't know. They don't know how long this lasts. And to tell you the truth, how do you blame them? Because we had him once, and we had an interregnum that was supposed to take it away, and now we have this again.
Yeah. So let me ask you about and let me just say something. You mentioned the Middle East briefly and how Trump is operating. He was warmly welcomed in May, more or less, in Saudi Arabia and Qatar and the UAE.
Yes.
But I'd go to these places pretty regularly. And a few weeks into his second administration, I detected something that was quite interesting. I was hearing policy conferences from officials, but then people in think tanks like me. They were seeing what Trump was saying about Canada.
Yes.
And Greenland and a few other things. And people think that they only care about their only part of the world. And they were seeing the tariffs and the threats of tariffs.
Right.
And these are countries that did pretty well in Trump's first term and are closely aligned. But what I detected, Doug, and I still think is underplay, and especially with the India, how Trump is dealing with India, is that there's a subtle hedging going on here. These countries realize that America is less predictable than it used to be. And they're not going to completely divest. And in fact, many of their investments will still stay here. But when it comes to geostrategic issues, the foreign policy questions, do you think that's what's going on?
I absolutely think that's what's going on. And I think that there is a kind of a bifurcation of foreign policy by many countries around the world, including the ones you mentioned.
Yeah.
One part of that is you say what you need to say in order to get into Trump's good graces if you need something.
Right.
The second part is you're very wary. You don't articulate that publicly, but you basically learn to take care of yourself.
Uh-huh.
And I do have to say, and I know we're going to get into this, the Middle East that we are seeing now is a very different place than when I started out in my career.
That was like in the 1990s?
That was working before that in the 1970s. And we'll talk about at some point here about the change in government in Iran in 1979.
Yeah,
in fact, I want to mention this now, if that's all right.
Sure, go for it, yeah.
I was the press attaché in London in 1979.
Right.
4 of my friends from the U.S. Information Service were among the 44 hostages that were held for so long.
Wow.
And it was very interesting and hit me personally because, as you know, about 9 months before the takeover of the embassy, there was an attempted takeover that lasted a few hours. Uh-huh. As a result of that, people who worked in our embassy in Tehran when we had it, the Iranians, realized they had to get the hell out of the country.
Yeah.
One of those people ended up being my secretary in London. Uh-huh. When I first arrived. We became very good friends. And she was horrified about what she was seeing among her countrymen, treating people that she had known at the embassy in Tehran the way we were treated. And what I found fascinating was when the hostages were ultimately released, within an hour, she had 2 telephone calls from the plane. Both were the CIA hostages who had been held, and both called her to say that they didn't hold anything against her and wanted to make sure she was okay.
Amazing.
It was an amazing story.
The people to people, and I have to say something about you because people don't know you like I know you. You have invested your life, your career, your passion in trying to connect people from different cultures and societies. I know in the second Obama administration, after you left in the first term, you were trying to build a network effort, but you did this through the Gilman Foundation. You and I, you remember we went to India together.
I remember you were one of the very few people who didn't get Giardia on the plane back.
Oh, yeah.
So Dan Feldman, who you later became SREP, will probably never forgive me for that.
The special representative.
That's correct. That's correct.
But you've been connecting and trying to connect people, and Trump has a different model. I've called it a gated community mindset, that he, in a sense, he lives in a gated community in Mar-a-Lago, and that he sees in some ways America in part as a place that we should just build higher walls, keep people out. And the thing I wanted to ask you, because in addition to the people to people, you've been huge in the field of strategic communications, and you mentioned public affairs. We have to talk about public diplomacy and public affairs because a next generation is coming up who actually won't know even what this is.
Oh, there's no question. But I want to go back to the gated community because I love you like a brother, but I'm going to disagree with you on this.
I like
and
it.
say, I thought the gated community analogy was more appropriate to Biden and his presidency and the way he operated foreign policy.
Really? Why?
And I'm going to tell you, the Afghan withdrawal was the prime example.
Yeah.
He had a foreign policy establishment of people he'd known forever, people who largely came up through elite institutions, think tanks, the State Department. And when it came time for the Afghan withdrawal, as you know, we left many hundreds of people on the field who had helped us on the field, and they are still there.
Yeah.
His administration was notified by individuals, and I worked at the Pentagon, young majors, young captains, young colonels who had served in Afghanistan and who had served with interpreters and contractors who had risked their lives to help and knew that unless attention was paid, because they remembered what happened in Iraq, that these people were going to suffer and that our word was going to be decimated, that you could trust America and Americans. And that is exactly what happened because these people could not penetrate the gated community.
Yeah, that's right. That's interesting. Yeah. And these are people who worked with us. And here's the thing. I was at the Center for American Progress when that happened. And I had worked in the first Trump administration at CAP with people who went into the Biden administration. They had a theory of the case, and it was this. It was 20 years of war after 9/11. We're going to end the AUMF. We're going to end endless wars. This slogan that we're going to end endless wars. But I don't think they thought through the implications on the personal level. And then also, I don't know if you buy the case or the idea that I think, look, you look at Biden's approval ratings, they were stronger than where Trump is right now. And he tanked because of the Afghanistan war and the stalling domestic agenda.
Well, I agree with that. And I think it was the Afghanistan war. And I have to say, nobody disagreed with the premise that it was time to end the war. That was not the issue.
Yeah.
The issue was that all of these people who had served on the battlefield, who didn't, go to Harvard and Yale and work for years at the State Department or the National Security Council, were trying to knock on the door and say, you've got to move now in April. Now, I have to say, if you have been in government a long time, sometimes you look at some of these people and say, well, they're irritating and they're pushy and they don't respect, who we are.
Right.
All of which is true, and all of which is the reason that they were prepared and understood what we faced. And I think we're going to get to Trump and my view on what you had to say earlier. But on this, one of the things that I think our party needs to be aware of, and one of the things that our foreign policy needs to reflect, is we can't be a gated community in developing it anymore. And the Afghanistan debacle of these hundreds, if not thousands of people left to fend for themselves is as damaging to us and to our country and to our word as anything. And I will tell you this.
Do you think the Afghanistan withdrawal in 2021 was as bad as the end of the Vietnam War? Because the Biden team was trying to avoid those images.
It was very interesting. They didn't avoid them. And I was around during the end of the Vietnam War, and I watched the helicopter, and I had friends who served in Vietnam. Do I think this was worse? In this way, in the way we've just been talking about.
Yeah.
We actually did help thousands of Vietnamese to get here.
Yeah.
I don't know how it compares to Afghanistan, but I do know because I tried to help a young woman get her family out. I watched as she couldn't make the airlift out. She spent another month in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
and she documented on her cell phone the slamming of the doors by the Taliban as she was hiding under tables. I think that Vietnam was a debacle. This was as well. And that gets us actually, Brian, to another point that I want to make in terms of where we are.
Can I say something more on the Afghanistan? And we'll close that chapter.
Yeah.
It is when the 20th anniversary of 9/11 happened, and this was like a few weeks after this withdrawal. I wrote a piece in a publication I used to write for the Liberal Patriot called Freefall.
I remember.
And when I saw the images, so think of the desperation of people who did not want America to leave them behind. Mm-hmm. It was so awful, their desperation, that some clung to the airplanes, the C-130s, and then they fell on the tarmac. And the images of people falling from a high height conjured up for me the start of it all. The 9/11 World Trade Center bombings, when people out of desperation were jumping out of burning buildings. And it was the end of 20 years of what did we do?
Well, that's right. And it does also bring to mind the images, the helicopters taking off from the embassy in Saigon.
There you go.
Yeah.
But you have Biden team members to this day say this was one of their proudest moments because they ended the war.
I'm delighted they ended the war. I'm not delighted that they didn't listen to people who had served there and said, you need to get these people out and you need to start working on it now. There is enough blame to go around on Afghanistan from Trump to Biden. But I will say that one of the things that we need to understand in foreign policy is that to be successful in today's world, you can't just attend the Aspen strategy groups.
Right.
And you have to broaden who's involved.
More voices.
My friend Jake Sullivan has said that he wanted to develop a foreign policy for the middle class. And the goal is very worthy, but I don't think it was accomplished because we didn't really listen to what the middle class was paying attention to.
Right.
And what were the strings that you needed to pluck in order to get attention.
Mm-hmm.
I think that since Vietnam, we have not had a military encounter overseas other than the Gulf War, where you have had the attention and support of the American public for more than a few months.
Yeah.
And the Gulf War was a few months.
Yeah.
Because after the beginning, to be able to explain to the American public, this is going to take a long time, and here's why it's important to us, has never been well articulated ever since then. And I think until we learn the lesson of how do you get from the average American citizen what's of interest and what's not, and be able to take that back to policymakers so that they can take that and incorporate it into why we've got to stay the course, why we've got to enter in.
Yeah.
I'll give you a couple of examples. I think that in a very divided country, which we are, there still happens to be some common threads.
And a lot of common threads. Yeah.
And a lot of those have to do with values.
Mm-hmm.
Americans don't like to think of themselves as people who are abandoning those who helped us. Americans don't like to think of themselves as not being able to feed starving people.
Right.
Americans want to succeed economically. I mean, every time we throw out we're against the billionaire class, I start to wonder, well, Americans, would love to be billionaires. They want to know how they can achieve that.
Right.
It's who we are, what we stand for, and whether we think that it is worth being admired and respected and more than anything else, trusted in the world, that I think is a common thread. I just have to say this, Brian, that when we started to get Afghan refugees coming over here,
right,
after they had to go through this unbelievable bureaucratic process. I was personally, and I have never, ever seen anything like it in my life.
Red tape at military bases in New Jersey and everywhere.
And complete inability by the State Department to handle these questions.
Yeah.
You started to have welcome committees all over this country.
Yeah, we had it.
They were not. They were in Kentucky and Texas and Missouri and Arizona and states that are considered red states, but people who were welcoming these people in because they knew that we owed them.
That's what makes this sort of MAGA phenomena really strange, because it isn't close to the fabric of a lot of what America is. You know, I'm from central Pennsylvania.
Yes.
And if you go to Lancaster County, you know what's Lancaster famous for? Do you know the Amish? Right?
Of course.
Yeah. What they've become in the last 10 years.
I'm going to be like Robert F. Kennedy, talking to you about Medicare. So
That's all right. No. What Lancaster County's become is this international culinary place where you drive up an hour and a half. Why? Because there's so many Christian organizations that have welcomed refugees from all over.
That's right.
And you go to downtown Lancaster, and it was in the New York Times a few years ago, you got to go there and eat the food of these people that they brought, and people love it, right? And
That's
the
right.
rancor and what we're seeing with ICE, and I don't want to get too political. We got to get back to the policy stuff. It doesn't connect well with middle America. I'm reflecting back with what you said. Second thing I'd say is what people want to hear in this connection from their leaders, and they're not getting it from the Democratic Party on foreign policy, is they want to feel safe. They want to feel a chance to be prosperous and have a better life, and they want to be inspired, connected to their values. And what I want to ask you, before we get to the Middle East, one last thing on Trump. Whatever he is, he's a master communicator in terms of getting the spotlight on him.
There's no question about it. And now we get back to the simile that you used, the metaphor that you used about the gated community.
Right.
I believe the gated community applies to Biden. I think that what you have with Trump is someone who is an all-powerful individual, wants to be all-powerful.
Right.
That it stems from him, and that his team is not so much an elite gated community as people that he thinks are going to represent him and carry out what it is he wants carried out. Now, the question is many of those people do not know what the F he wants to have carried out at any given time.
Because he can change his mind.
You look at our Secretary of State, who
is the National Security Advisor.
Who is the National Security Advisor and archivist and many other things. And I'm sure he's watching Cuban refugees in Miami as a person, being repatriated, and probably inside wondering, what's going on. Many of the positions that he held, including Ukraine, he now is an advocate for very different policies.
Right.
And
he's a shapeshifter. But yes, you've seen shapeshifters in both parties.
I've never seen anything like this. And to stay in the Trump world and to be able to affect policy, you have to be a shapeshifter. And to the degree that you're a really successful one, you can often have more than one job. You can have 2, 3, or 4, because there's not that many who are. Now, let me just say one thing about the public aspect of foreign policy here under Trump. People are starting to wonder about tariffs. I mean, you take a look at the state of Iowa, which I believe, you can check this out, I could be wrong, is probably the most trade-dependent state in the country, given the fact that so much of their agricultural products are exported, much of it to China. The tariffs are going to begin to hit. That and the immigration policy, which says, sorry, the workers who are helping you got to go. There's going to start to be a real bite here.
Let me tell you, I was in Wichita at speaking at a World Affairs Council type local event at a country club. And it was on April 2nd, Liberation Day by Trump. And these people were pissed, right? They were angry. These are conservative businessmen and farmers. And they're like, what is with these formulas? And our supply chains are connected, and our products, our agricultural products, are going to the world.
Right.
America's prosperity is dependent on connectivity, not breaking those connections.
I think you're exactly right. I want to say one other thing about Trump, because as we're all watching in wonder, some of the things we're seeing are things where you say, well, I wonder if we should adopt these. For example, he is someone who moves quickly. He says what he thinks. He says it every day. It's all out there. There's no, classified anything. There's no secrets.
There's no interlocutor between brain and mouth.
That's correct. And for some of the things, you start to think, well, maybe this is putting the fear of God into people that need to have the fear of God put into them.
Yeah.
The question ends up being, after he does that, then what? Now, I'll tell you, look at Armenia and Azerbaijan, you look at Thailand and Cambodia. If those things hold, there's an expression in Yiddish called a begazint, which means, go for it. And maybe those things worked because the heads of those countries are probably more scared of tariffs than they are of.
Oh, interesting. So you think there is some leverage in like the Congo, like the
Congo, Rwanda.
Yeah.
I think the answer is who knows, but it's worth looking at.
So
we don't know because we haven't seen all the end results.
So keep an open mind on what Trump's trying to do here on some of these files, right?
It's watch them. And I think if there's a lesson to be learned, it's you can, twiddle your thumbs only so long in trying to make policy, but sometimes it helps just to step in and do something.
So you've been in public affairs, strategic communications. You were the top guy at the Pentagon for this in the first term of Obama. You worked for Secretary Gates and Panetta. I remember you kindly invited my wife and son and I to one of your ceremonies, and I think it was your retirement ceremony. And I'll never forget little Ben, who's now taller than I am. He came, we're sitting in the back. He's like 4 or 5. We're trying to keep him humored, and we gave him a peanut butter sandwich. And he got peanut butter all over his hands. And Secretary Leon Panetta walks into the room to come honor you and your career. And he shakes Ben's hands and gets peanut butter all over his hands.
We need more Democrats like that. Get some peanut butter on your hands.
Before we're going to get to the Middle East, but you worked on strategic communications in government, out of government, and last question, absolute last question on Trump until we get to the Middle East, is that I think, look, Trump is erratic. He's uncertain on certain things, unpredictable, but he knows how to do messaging in ways that Democrats might not know. In 2019, when I was at my previous think tank job, we did a study, went around the country. We did polling, focus groups. It was in a report called America Adrift, which you read. And essentially it said people understood what Donald Trump at the time stood for, right? He was the president at the time. Basically, he had a narrative. Foreigners are taking advantage of America, and I'm going to make them pay more, and this is over. When we asked people in the open-ended, what did Democrats stand for? They didn't even understand the language that we were using. They were like, we would test in focus groups and qualitative. What do you think of the liberal international order? And blank stares. They didn't understand what was another thing. Exceptional. Is American an exceptional country? One woman in Georgia in the focus group said, "Yeah, I think we're exceptional. We accept too much nonsense in this country." And we were using language as Democrats. So on the messaging about foreign policy, and you mentioned Biden's failed attempt, and I do think it failed, and it was one of the reasons why Trump got reelected, is people who had a vague slogan of foreign policy for the middle class, but knocked back by policy. How do you get this right? How do you get to an engaged internationalist narrative that connects with the American public?
I think you have to find out what's important to the American public about engaging. You need to understand what is so that you can build on it, and you need to understand what isn't, because sometimes what isn't clashes with what you need to do.
Yeah.
And if you need to do something on behalf of the country's national security, you need to be able to explain to people why you're doing it.
Right.
The most articulate communicator on Ukraine is Volodymyr Zelensky. He went from being, a comic actor in a television show to being the hero of the world, because he basically started by saying, "Don't send me planes, send me weapons. Don't get me out of here." And there he was, and Americans love an underdog who wins, who is going to stand his ground and fight and win.
Yeah.
And that's what he has done. And so you had a lot of support for much longer than I had expected for him and the sale of weapons and all of this. And it wasn't until Trump came on the scene and his MAGA people, and he started to say, I don't know that I'm going to keep supporting Ukraine. Why he said this, Brian, I have no idea.
Yeah, it's a puzzle.
And I don't think he knows either.
Yeah.
I do think he thinks that his relationship with people like Putin or Xi or Kim Jong-un, or even people like Erdogan in Turkey, who is autocratic but not the same thing as a Putin.
Yeah.
He believes that he has the power to move them. I think that he thinks like a businessman, and I think he thinks like a narcissist. And I think he thinks like someone who enjoys power. And all those three things combine, in my view, to much better explain his foreign policy than anything we're reading in FP.com or by think tanks.
Yeah, so I will close the Trump chapter on all this, but in his first term, I wrote a piece in a business magazine that says Trump operates his White House like a Middle East dictator. and some people get angry at it, but I've seen it. I lived in Egypt and other places, and I can substantiate it. Number one, you keep the family business open.
Correct.
And you try to keep money for it and make money for it. Number two, you bring some of the family members in or not. And then three, bring generals into positions where you don't need generals. Four, you hate on the media. There's a formula there, and it's sort of like jokey, but it's a serious thing. And as you said, and you started talking at the beginning of this conversation about autocracy and things like this, we hope to God that we're not facing this here. And we're going to turn to the Middle East shortly.
I think we're here. I think we're here.
Uh-huh.
I don't think we have to worry about facing it. I think we're here, but I want to come back one thing to Trump and the Middle East, if you don't mind.
Well, yeah, we're getting into
on the Middle East, and that is to say, it's very interesting, his relationships with Arab Gulf state leaders, because that is one area where he's been successful.
Right.
And I think he's been successful because they understand the need to flatter him. But they're also business people. And the Saudi Arabia and Gulf states that we see today are very different
than when you were growing up.
And when I was growing up, when it was oil sheikdoms. I mean, the UAE, Bahrain, Oman, Qatar, these were places that were populated by nomads.
Do you know what the secret sauce is there? And what's different? It's the people. And going back to something you said earlier, they've invested in the people. And
it's exactly correct. That is exactly right. And what you have now, you're far more an expert than I am on this, but I think the leadership of those countries not only are attuned to the people, but they see their future not as oil, but they see their future as being attractive to the world in the ways the world is advancing. They see it in terms of AI. They see it in terms of tourism. They see it in terms of commerce. And I think probably more than any place else in the world, this is a region, the Arab part of it, or the Gulf part of it, where the term deal, let's make a deal, is something that's not only natural, but that's a foreign policy.
Right.
Now, as a result of that, Trump has been able, and some of his minions, including his son-in-law, have been able to make deals.
Yeah.
And so you got the Abraham Accords.
Uh-huh.
And you can't criticize the Abraham Accords because that's a step forward. I find it interesting. When I was working for Gary Hart, I remember having to jump on a plane from Washington to New York when he was going to the United Nations to make sure he understood why it was we can't move the embassy to Jerusalem.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
That was the gospel for decades.
Yeah.
Trump moved it, Biden kept it there, and there it is.
Yeah.
And you have the Abraham Accords, and you have a very different Israel. You're one of the first people I would look to say that you can't say about the Middle East or Africa or Asia, this is like one place. How is Africa different? This is 54 different countries.
Right. There's diversity.
And Syria is as different from Qatar and Bahrain as you can get. But what you have seen is the rise of non-state actors. And what I will tell you is this: when I was at the Pentagon, I was a minority of one or two when the argument was we had to discuss our new foreign policy by talking to a pivot to China.
Oh, yeah.
And I argued strenuously not to use the word pivot.
Yeah.
Because the word pivot means you're moving away from one thing and into another. And I didn't see how you could ignore some of the things that were going on in place of China. You had to constantly keep them in mind.
You know the verb I used? And I wrote an article about this. Pivot or rebalance. All of this also, and this is like a Tom Donilon thing.
Yes.
And others. You got to toggle. So you know how you have computer program applications when you open up and you toggle between different things.
That's correct.
You have to multitask. Why? Because the rest of the world is doing this.
That's correct. I call it walk and chew gum at the same time.
There you go. Yeah.
But we saw that we couldn't do that. And that...
Why? Why not? Why not?
Because the Israeli-Palestinian issue is at the core of why we can't turn away. And it has been for 75 years.
Yeah.
I was born 2 years after the partition of Palestine into Palestine.
And you're Jewish American.
And I'm a Jewish American. And so I remember Israel. Well, there's two things that have shaped that conflict for 75 years. It hasn't changed. The creation of a state of Israel, because 6 million people were killed in a Holocaust, and we said never again.
Right.
And the partition into Palestine, where thousands of Palestinians lost their homes.
Yeah.
And a people thought that this was a kind of a dagger in their heart with regard to land. And those frameworks continue to this day to shape that conflict. And what has been added are the non-state actors who, in my view, based on hate on both sides, have affected how we deal with that issue.
Right. So you say both sides. It's not just Hamas and terrorists.
Hamas is a terrorist organization.
Right.
The settlers in the West Bank, who have continued to encroach on territory. I don't call them terrorists, but I call them an element that continues to rub salt in the wound.
Look, you disagreed with me earlier. They're extremists, in my view.
Yeah.
And they have a certain worldview, and it's based on faith and other things, but they terrorize their neighbors. I know this from friends who live in the West Bank, and I'm sorry to say this, but that's what it is. And the Biden team, Trump is not doing anything about this because there's now talk of annexation and just a denial. We have a U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, who at certain points before he got this position said he doesn't support the two-state solution. He doesn't think Palestinians in a real sense exist in that sense. So I don't want to get into the terrorist or all that, but there's a certain extremists feed off of extremists themselves.
There is, and what it is doing is continuing to tear the region apart.
Right.
Everything from October 7th to the famine that we are seeing in Gaza.
And it is a famine.
Yes, but the differences now are considerable. And that has to do with where we are in America, how we look at this issue right now, how young people are looking at this issue. One of them is non-state actors like Hamas or ISIS or Al-Qaeda or the settlers. I don't equate them in terms of, but
Clear.
I say they are not state actors.
Yeah, because settlers are not taking hostages.
No. Settlers are not. The second is communication. We never watched on television a famine like we're seeing here. I mean, you could say in South Sudan and in Sudan it's way worse, but that's not being televised. This is being brought home by television and social media, and it's Americans are faced with this. And this gets back to what I do consider a fundamental value, that people find this a horror and they want to do something about it. Let me just say this, Brian. When I was growing up, Israel was the land of milk and honey.
Yeah.
Golda Meir, David Ben-Gurion, later Itzhak Rabin, remarkable technology. And Israel was the victim in a region that wanted to destroy it.
It was attacked in wars.
Right. And as American Jew, just born not so many years after the Holocaust, I and my generation grew up with this framework of never again.
Right.
Never again.
Yeah.
And I remember I was the head coach at the Tucson Jewish Community Center.
In Arizona?
Yeah. And a couple of my swimmers had mothers who had tattoos on their wrists, and that's and that's when I knew Holocaust.
Yeah. So can I just say something here? So Ben, our son, you'll see him tonight later. He, a few years ago, got interested in World War II history, and I love history. I was a history major and things like that. Took him to the Churchill war rooms in London and the beaches in Normandy where his great-grandfather served and all of this. And he was a little young, but he was like the Holocaust. He knew that this was happening. So I took him to the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum on the ride down. He said, "Dad, are any of those people alive?" Which I said. He said, "The people who got out and weren't killed." And I said, "Yeah, they're getting older and things like that." We walk into the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, and he's like 9 or 8 or 9 or something like this. And there were 3 elderly gentlemen behind a table. And they're like, "Ask me about my experience." And I think there's evil in the world, right? And Ben sat for 45 minutes and asked questions about these guys who were trained to talk to children, others, to impart their experience as a survivor of the Holocaust. And I thought, I don't know how you defeat evil, but like this seems when you live on to tell your story, and when you survive something like this, and then tell people, and it's so complicated. Going back to the Gaza thing, and let's get into the Gaza.
It is, but let's take the door you've opened as a way to get in and say, we haven't defeated it. We haven't defeated it. I mean, we won in World War II, but we haven't defeated anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
We haven't defeated the hate. And clearly, this is a horrible thing to say, but I will say this. The very valid Israeli desire to eliminate Hamas cannot be achieved because whatever they do in terms of the numbers of people they eliminate, the hate will stay. And that is what needs to be addressed, is the hate. And how you do that, I don't know. Because as an American Jew, I'm watching this discussion, and I've dealt with this in 8 presidential campaigns politically, and I've dealt with this in policy.
Yeah.
I've been to Israel. I've been to Jordan. Gary Hart and I stayed at King Hussein's palace to talk about this. We met with Itzhak Rabin and Shimon Peres. Gary saw the front lines, on the Golan Heights. I have maps of this. And as an American Jew, this is horrible, horrible. Because you watch what's going on in Gaza and you say, this is not me. This is not my religion. This is not my people.
Yeah.
And then you see what happened. You remember what happened on October 7th. And it hurts. And you say, the never again doesn't exist. And you try.
Well, you also see, like, from so many different dimensions where people can't just respect and recognize the dignity of others.
No, you can't. And, I was trying to think if there was anything in the world that was a model for how you deal with this. And the closest I came was Nelson Mandela's Reconciliation Commission. And I pray to God that someday we get there in Gaza. But I don't know how we stop. And this now gets to American policy. Can we talk about that for a little bit?
Yeah. Well, what is American policy on Gaza? You said Trump. You're not clear what his overall policy.
You're not clear on any given day. I mean, he sees he sees the famine and he wants to feed people.
He wants a Gaza Riviera.
He wants a Gaza Riviera. He wants Netanyahu to deal with the problem and eliminate it. He wants many things. In terms of, it's interesting because there's now litmus tests, as there has always been in discussion of this issue.
And you were an advisor to Pete Buttigieg.
I wasn't an advisor. I still am.
We'll get to that in a second.
You still are.
You still are.
I still am.
Yeah.
And you have litmus tests about, do you support or oppose Bernie Sanders not wanting to sell weapons to Israel?
Yeah.
Is it is it a genocide?
Yeah.
Here's what this is. It is an unacceptable situation, and we need to understand certain basics. The American people watch the famine, and they say, how do we stop it? They also say, Israel has been an ally for 75 years. There are new players in this, including the people that Mike Huckabee represents, which are, evangelical Christians. They were never an element of this until 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And that has affected the shift in feelings from the Democratic Party to the Republican Party. But there's a new generation of Americans which doesn't remember 6 million.
Yeah.
What it sees is famine, and what it has heard is that the victim in the Middle East is not Israel, which I grew up with, but the Palestinians, and that we cannot agree on a state.
Right.
So in my view, a credible policy has to say there needs to be a two-state solution, but the Palestinian state must not be governed ever by Hamas.
Right.
Ever. And that one of our priorities in dealing with our colleagues and friends in the Middle East, particularly the Gulf states, is that there be a lead taken and that this be a priority, an absolute priority that never again, and Qatar is in an interesting position here, and I think is in a position to take a lead.
I agree with all of that. I don't get for a minute why the Biden administration, sorry, we've been dunking on our friends, the Democratic administration, but when this war started, but even before it started, the two-state solution was the ideal. It was the policy. They were doing things like the Abraham Accords. People forget this, but we Middle East policy wonks remember, is that they were doing things called the Negev Summit. They were trying to take the countries that had relations. And our new colleague, Yael Lempert, who was the ambassador to Jordan, she was part of these discussions, and it was important. But my view is that the Biden team at the most strategic level didn't do the thing that I think was required, which was to say we need actual bold diplomatic leadership. I was arguing at the time, we need to build a regional and international coalition for the two-state solution, not something like
I totally agree with you.
Yeah.
I totally agree with you. I won't knock the Biden administration for this, because I think that American administrations, as this has developed, have not had the balls to act decisively. Trump does. But the question is what's it based on? And you never know from one day to the next. But we got the Abraham Accords because he understood that people want to make deals. Let's talk about weapons to Israel.
Yeah. Mayor Pete was...
Mayor Pete...
Sorry, call him that. It was Secretary Pete.
Yes. My friend Pete, during his campaign, was opposed to providing the kinds of weapons to Israel that would continue the expansion of settlements in the West Bank. And I believe that we should oppose the sale of weapons to Israel that continue to hamper food aid getting in effectively and continuously. But I absolutely would oppose any halt in sales to Israel of the kinds of weapons like Iron Dome or others, which enable Israel to defend itself, as we saw from the Iranian bombing.
So, but you worked at the Pentagon.
I did.
And again, I'm not disagreeing here, but this distinction between offensive and defensive weapons, and I heard these debates about the Yemen war and what Saudi was doing and other things. Is it crystal clear? And you know how quickly arms sales and the movement of arms go. It's not as fast as a lot of people think. A lot of the things that was right.
Yes,
so
that's correct.
So the question I'm asking is a sort of a precise, but in the weeds. But you worked at the Pentagon, and do these debates actually matter for effectuating the outcomes that people pin on them?
They matter in that the people at the Pentagon who are responsible for carrying this out are listening to them and are understanding, even though what you're saying is 100% correct, that this takes time.
Yeah.
But the political environment for approving the sales of these things is the architecture under which people work.
And we don't have a solid
I think we don't.
Yeah.
The other thing has to do with the famine. You want to talk about policy for a middle class? Americans would like to see these starving children being fed.
Yeah.
So would everybody. It is ridiculous to say there is no famine going on in Gaza.
Yeah.
And the huge impact that October 7th had on starting on October 8th and beyond is starting to diminish. And it's diminishing as Israel's position as the strong democracy and the country with values is starting to diminish as people equate that with what they're seeing there.
Yeah.
what I think a bold foreign policy move would be for the United States, whether it would be the Republicans or the Democrats, would be to say, we are tomorrow assembling a coalition of Arab states and European states to ensure that on the ground, that food deliveries can be made in the long term, that the Jose Andreses of the world and their world central kitchens can continue to provide this food unimpeded by any security issues where the food is being given. Yeah. And that we hope that we can do this with the support and assistance of Israel. But this must be done.
Yeah. And I would, let me build on your idea. I would say then this could be a framework that actually tries to help build a governance structure that's not corrupt, that responds to the needs of Palestinian people.
That's correct.
And this is a better pathway than the idea that was floated at the beginning of September by the Trump administration of paying $5,000 to Palestinians to get out. And I actually think it's hard. And you describe as hard and what I'm saying is hard, but it's harder the fantasy land of actually trying to displace.
And with this, Brian, would come a concomitant commitment to provide whatever intelligence was necessary to make sure that Israel was able, on a special ops basis, to be able to continue to address the Hamas problem.
Yeah. So we really we're running short on time. Hold on, I want to take a pause. We're cool with this because I think we're cooking with gas. Can we go another 20?
Yeah.
All right, because it's fine if we run.
You're not going to want me for 20.
No, it's fine, and we'll want you more. And like, you're not even going to go to sleep tonight. And when Kristen shows up and everything, like, sorry, people, it's going to be a long night. I think this. So we'll sort of cut all of this out. I think this is great. I don't know. Like, you said some things on Iran. Do you think we need to do more on Middle East? Because I was going to go to the politics.
We can do more on the Middle East if you want.
But what do you guys think? It's okay. We touch Gaza, and that's enough, right?
You were gonna maybe do Iran more, maybe touch on
Iran. Like really short on Iran.
Let me say something on Iran here.
Yeah. So, but
because
hold on. Let's set it up. So we Doug, we talked about Gaza. We certainly didn't solve it all, but you actually have a clear idea, and then I build on it. Iran, I view as the other big strategic challenge and threat in the region, and I actually think it's connected to the problem of Israel-Palestine.
Right.
And I know this sounds crazy, but when I go to the region and hear from our friends in Saudi Arabia and Jordan and Egypt, but especially in the Gulf countries, they feel insecure in two ways. They feel insecure because Iran continues to threaten them with cyber and terrorism, even though there's a rapprochement diplomatically on other things. And they feel insecure because the unresolved Israel Palestine situation, right? And and I see them interlinked. I don't see administrations, not Trump, not Biden, not Obama, not recent ones, dealing with it in an integrated way. You mentioned the bombing of Iran in June and the 12-day war. What's next? What would you advise, and how do you see the situation there on Iran?
I want to say two things on Iran, because I think that there is a connection between public opinion in the United States, public opinion in Gaza, public opinion in Israel, and public opinion in Iran. And I think that all of those elements have a common thread in that they don't necessarily agree. In fact, in some cases, strongly disagree with the policies their governments are carrying out. When you see 100,000 people in Tel Aviv and elsewhere protesting against Netanyahu's policies, the famine and the hostage policy and the continuation of the war.
Yeah.
Brian, those are Jews, and that is not anti-Semitism.
Yeah. There you go.
Okay?
Yeah.
In Gaza, when you see the kids suffering famine, you don't see their grieving parents say, "Yay, Hamas. Yay, Hamas government," do you?
No.
In Iran, it's very interesting because my mentors in the Foreign Service they were the last people to serve in the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. And they loved the people of Iran. And my roommate in graduate school, not my roommate, but one of my close friends, was Iranian. And the people of Iran are probably the most Western-oriented people, or grew up like that there are in the Middle East. And I do not believe for a second that there is a solid majority that supports the government that leads them.
Mm-hmm.
And so this gets to a point that we're going to talk about in a little bit, which has to do with how do you deal with the people of a country and not just the autocracies? Because I think foreign policy, as we're facing it now, has to do with how do you deal with autocracies, with countries that now are not necessarily going to be attracted to the United States, but not disengaged from it. They're going to wonder how you deal with it, and they're going to look for other relationships.
Yeah.
And how do you reestablish a connection with the publics in these countries that I think was fundamental to people trusting the United States? Because without trust, you're not much of any place.
Right.
In Iran, what's next? Who knows where the nuclear capabilities now stand. I personally would trust the general who's been fired from the Pentagon for saying it didn't set them back.
From the DIA.
Exactly.
Yeah, because Trump was saying the program was obliterated and it was part of the messaging, back to the messaging thing. But the facts don't back that up.
But it would be interesting. I mean, I think we need to know what it did do and whether or not there is any grounds now for not necessarily reinstating the JCPOA, but for some new agreement.
But your point is you can't have that conversation until you know what we're talking about.
That's correct.
Right?
And we don't know what we're talking about.
So what's interesting, I did 2 trips to Oman for the Middle East Institute this year alone. And we had a delegation there in May. And it was around the time of the 3rd or 4th round of talks. The U.S. and Iran were sitting down under the Trump administration, and there was an attempt at diplomacy.
Correct.
I do these report cards every quarter on the foreign policy of the U.S. administrations in the Middle East. I gave them a B for the first quarter because they were using this mix of signaling that we could use force, but we were engaging in diplomacy. It's not.
That's right.
It's not black or white. But then they moved in June, and there was damage done, as you said earlier, but we don't know.
We don't. But what I do think is Iran is a bit on its heels at the moment. I mean, if you're going to try to bring Iran to the table, this is probably not a bad time to do it.
Yeah.
Given what's happened in Syria, given what's happened with Hezbollah, given what's going on with Hamas, and even with the Houthis.
Yeah.
So it's worth exploring. The thing that I don't know, and none of us know, is what goes on at the State Department or what's left of the National Security Council or, what pretends to be our intelligence apparatus. What goes on there to provide the elements necessary to do this? And here's where I would say, the Biden administration had competent, trusted people in all of these positions. I have to say that Bill Burns is a hero of mine.
Super. Yeah.
I don't know him well, but I think he is the model, the epitome of what the United States ought to be producing as its future. That's the aspiration for people who want to be in government, is to be a Bill Burns.
Yeah.
But you just do not know what the heck exists there now. I mean, as well as I do, I have many friends at the State Department, many friends at the Pentagon, and they're all bereft. Morale is terrible. They don't know what to think. They're trying to do their jobs, and they never know from one day to the next what's happening next.
Yeah, I've written about it, this whole process of gutting and cutting, and USAID is gone. Mike Abramowitz, head of VOA, is a friend. And he's still there because of other things, but most of the people aren't. And I've written it as unilateral disarmament. These are tools of U.S. power, and you were part of it for decades. Thank you for the service in doing that. And I think whatever happens in the next few years, we're going to have to build that back if we want to stay engaged in the world.
We're going to have to build something. It may not be. I want to read something to you here in a second that I think is very important.
Yeah.
we have to build something back. In 1996, the Clinton administration essentially neutered public diplomacy in the name of reinventing government and appeasing Jesse Helms. And they smushed it into the State Department. And now we have virtually nothing. We're watching the dismantlement of the Voice of America, which, by the way, was a something that Joe Biden valued hugely, the radios. And he was right. They were instruments of being able to provide truth and facts in places that weren't getting them. To look at what happened with USAID is just appalling. On our podcast last week, we had Gail Smith, who was another one.
Oh, I got to listen to that. Gail, I worked with her at CAP, and she became USAID administrator. I didn't know she was on.
She is one of the most outstanding, passionate, strong people I've ever met.
Cool. Yeah.
And we had her, but she said, there were things that needed to be fixed. Now, the problem is what people think of now when they see this is either it's been fully destroyed or it needed to be destroyed. And nobody looked at what needed to be fixed.
Yeah.
And what I would say with public diplomacy is you need to take a look at the communications environment that we live in now.
Yeah.
And we had a very multifurcated division. We had open communications and secret communications and public diplomacy.
Yeah.
And what you need is a holistic approach to engaging in the world, not like this little unit that they had at the State Department of like 3.5 people designed to, fight on Twitter and the social media what was coming out from ISIS, but something where people gathered together and said, to deal with this, we need this in public diplomacy, and we need to do this with regards to our development, and we need to do this with our covert communication so that it's something in tandem. But a very close friend of mine named Bob Lagama died a couple of days ago.
Oh, I'm sorry.
He was not famous. He wasn't famous at all. He was a quintessential public diplomacy officer. We served together in Italy, and he served throughout Africa. And he wrote a piece last year, and this is what he wrote. He said, this is why he did what he did in his career. He said, the stories that we told over and over again dealt with American democracy, with free press, human rights, rule of law, and free and fair elections. It was our profound belief that the U.S. experience was a beneficial message to much of the world. We worked with opposition groups, civil society organizations, and what we considered to be the most forward-looking visionaries in those societies. I thought, he said, it was the best job imaginable to help the world understand the humanity and justice and steadfastness of America. And we did this by simply telling the truth. And it hurt my heart because not only do we not do that now, but it's like we can't do that now. We have to rebuild not just the institutions, Brian, but we have to rebuild the humanity, the justice, and the steadfastness of America that people thought were synonymous with us. Now, do you know what people use as synonymous with immigration? Fentanyl, border closings, and Latin American gangs.
Yeah.
That's not what immigration was. You want to know what immigration was? Read Emma Lazarus on the Statue of Liberty. And our podcast on that talked about 2 non-Latino immigrants who have come to the United States. And despite having to fight through the Taliban and despite having to fight Mauritania, where they came from, in order to get asylum here, they think America is the best place in the world. And at root, it still is. But we have such a long road to go now in order to rebuild not just the institutions, but what the institutions are serving.
And the soul. So cheers to Bob, right?
Bob. Cheers to Bob Lagama. God bless it.
Rest in peace. And Doug, thanks for sharing that. We're going to move this along to a different facet of your life. This is a great conversation. Thanks for sharing that with me. I want to talk about U.S. domestic politics and foreign policy. We got into it a little bit, but as we mentioned, you served as Pete Buttigieg's national security advisor in the 2020 presidential campaign. You had 450 people. You actually had me at a lunch before he was running. Remember? It was at the Jefferson right down the street.
That's right. I remember.
I was really impressed. I got to tell you, with him, I didn't sign up for any campaign in 2020 for a variety of reasons, but when I meet political people like this and talk national security, because I've been doing it for 20 years and did a lot of presidential campaigns and then Senate and things like this, I look for people who really want to know what the issue is all about. And that's one category. And then there are politicians on the foreign policy stuff that is like, what do I say? And that's all they want to know is the talking point, right?
Correct.
And Pete was category one. He was like, because he served, all this other stuff and things like this. Now, you mentioned your podcast a couple of times. It is Boomerlennials.
That's correct.
Josh Brenner. Who's Josh Brenner?
Josh Brenner is a young actor
who played
who he did two things. He came to fame because if you saw the HBO series Silicon Valley, he was one of the stars of that.
Yeah.
And he played Big Head.
Uh-huh.
He has since appeared in many other things, including The Last of Us and Three Body Problem, some great things.
Yeah.
And he also appeared in a movie in 2018 called The Front Runner.
Who did he play?
He played me. He played me. The movie was about Gary Hart.
Yeah.
I was Gary's foreign policy advisor and his deputy campaign
in the
manager
1984 presidential
1984 presidential campaign, and Josh played me. Can I tell you a quick story about this?
Get on it. Yeah.
Okay. You mentioned at the beginning that I was the first openly gay individual to be Senate confirmed to a senior Pentagon position.
Yeah, you are.
And so when they cast this movie, which was based on a book by Matt Bai, which was written due to a long lunch that he and I had about Gary Hart, the director, Jason Reitman, asked Hugh Jackman to play Hart.
Uh-huh.
And he then asked me and a colleague of mine to brief Hugh on what it was like to be Hart.
So you met Hugh Jack?
Oh, yes.
Uh-huh.
Oh, yes. I had many long conversations with him on the phone about this. And at the end of this, at the end of about a month and a half, he thanked me and he said, gosh, if there's ever anything I can do for you, tell me. I said, there's one thing you can do for me, and tell me who's going to play me in this movie. And he, the next day he calls me up and he says, it's a guy named Josh Brenner. And he's really funny and he's really nice. And he sat next to me at the table, Reed, and I think he'll be very happy. And he was in a show called Silicon Valley.
Uh-huh.
I'd never seen Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
But I entered Josh Brenner and I put Brenner into Google, and up comes this unbelievably hunk of guy who looked just like Chris Hemsworth. And I am sitting there thinking, like, I have died and gone to heaven.
Wow.
That I'm going to be played by this, like, male model, but it didn't say anything about Silicon Valley.
Uh-huh.
So I Google and I said, Josh Brenner, Silicon Valley. And Google says to me, do you mean Brenner with one N? And I said, I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
This was the precursor to my now new best friend, ChatGPT. But so it brings, and there is this little guy who played, Big Head on Silicon Valley. And I wasn't even mad. I wasn't mad because I said, you nailed it. That's me. That's me. And as there was,
And then who would play me in a movie? No, unfair. No.
I got to think about that.
Later,
We'll talk about that over dinner.
That's a great
But
I'd never heard that before.
Oh, yeah. But as a result, Josh and I then got to be good friends. And I found out that he's a Harvard grad. He headed Hasty Pudding there.
Oh.
He's a very thoughtful guy.
Yeah, I hear on the podcast.
And we decided to do this podcast because we come from different generations. I'm a boomer. He's a millennial. And also because we wanted to have conversations like the one we're having now, which wasn't conventional wisdom, which wasn't like the regular panelists on the Sunday shows, but something where you talked about issues and things in a different way, from in part a generational point of view,
but authentic.
And so we started to do this, and our producer is a Gen Z, so we're going to probably put the S on boom millennials into a Z and bring him in.
Yeah.
But he and I are both Jewish. And we will very shortly be talking about this, soon.
Yeah, and you can have me on the podcast to talk about the Middle East.
We plan.
So you had Pete earlier this spring, and let's go to the presidential and the politics of this.
Yes.
I was at a dinner last night. I can't say where, but it was with people who are from the Democratic Party, our circles, and things like this. And I've been doing this for years, and I think the hardest thing is to be a substantive expert and really know a file like Israel or the Middle East or Russia or whatever, and then try to translate it into a vernacular, an ordinary language that people can understand. And why does this matter? And some of the most painful meetings I've been in are where people who are wonks, but then think they can do politics and they don't actually speak a language. As I said earlier, before when we did the focus groups and polling, people didn't know the very language that some of the party elites, especially in the Democratic Party, use to talk about foreign policy and things like that. Where is the center of gravity in the Democratic Party these days on foreign policy? You talked a little bit about it on the Middle East and Gaza and other things, but bigger picture. Today, is there one?
I don't know where it is, because I think it's something that has to be developed. It's not necessarily that you're starting from square one, but you have to address the issues that not only are different about the world that we live in now, but are different because of the administration under which we're living now and the effect that has had. I'll tell you this about Pete. Pete's been a friend of mine for 20 years.
How did you meet him?
He worked for me in the John Kerry campaign. I called him up out of a sheaf of resumes and said, "I like your resume. If you want to come and work in Arizona, come on out here. You can be the research director." Yeah. 2 days later, there he was. And I brought him back to Washington. He worked with me on the White Oak stuff, and I helped him with the military stuff, and I helped him come out. And we have been come out
As
yes,
yeah, okay,
yeah. So we have been friends for a long, long time. And when he decided he was going to run for president, this, surprised me as much as everybody else. But because of the personal connection, I said, of course, I will help you.
Yeah.
Of course, I will do foreign policy for you. But he was a blank slate he had no baggage when it came to foreign policy.
Yeah.
And I'm somebody who is, I suppose, you would consider to be the contrarian or a different thinker, and I'm not a conventional wisdom guy.
Yeah.
And I said, we are going to build a team of the next generation, and the requirement for being on this foreign policy team is that we are not doing the same old talking points. It's going to be where you think about where we should be going.
Yeah.
And
future, not
future, but not abstract.
Yeah.
Not like,
academic and
not academic. And so we thought we wanted people who had experience in the area, not necessarily just think tanks, but who had been in the area, like you have been in Gaza.
You tried to get me there.
Yeah, no. I tried, but I mean, the kind of people whose foreign policy views are shaped not just by the think tanks they've been in or the institutions they've been in, but by they've lived and they've seen the situation and where they've been.
Right.
And Pete actually, to the extent that he had foreign policy experience, had that.
Yeah.
He studied Arabic in Tunisia. He went to Norway. He and his friend Nat visited Somaliland because they were so curious about what it was.
Yeah.
And he had this curiosity that I thought, this is going to be great. And it was. And I have to say, of the 8 presidential campaigns that I have worked on, this was the most interesting and most joyous. And we talked about, we wanted to address issues that at the time we thought was important. Like, for example, we use sanctions as our nonviolent tool in order to address problems. And
right.
I wanted to put some of these people's minds to work and say, are there other avenues besides sanctions
right.
that we haven't even thought of and we can develop? that become other tools that are effective.
Yeah.
That aren't just words. We aren't just drawing lines in the sand.
What'd you come up with?
Nothing.
Oh.
We came up with nothing at the time, but it wasn't because we didn't try.
Yeah.
It was because we hadn't thought about it. This country hasn't thought about it. And it was a compressed amount of time.
Yeah.
But people now, I mean, the people who were on that group are still thinking about now, what do you think about this? We had people who came to us who said, we could have gone to Biden, but this was not kind of the same old groupthink and endless meetings. You actually asked us, what we thought about things.
Yeah.
We had Pete do early on a foreign policy speech, and the
Right.
framework of that
was
was
in Chicago, or
it was at the University of Indiana. So that he could
Yeah.
be introduced by Senator Lugar and Congressman Hamilton.
Yeah. Smart.
Tell us why.
Yeah. Tell us why for the next generation. Why? I get it. Yeah, but why?
These were two Indianans from the Middle West who were Democrat and Republican. Now, Lugar passed away shortly after, and he couldn't do it, but Hamilton was there. And before, this was before we were asking for endorsements, and Hamilton got it. And it was at the time, I thought it was a extremely interesting speech, because while he used as touchstones, various fundamentals of U.S. foreign policy, he talked about the future and what his generation was going to have to face, in foreign policy. And I think that's where we need to go. Are those discussions going on right now? Maybe. I have no idea.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Because if they're going on among the same elites that have been here, constantly, you're not going to get the kind of new thinking that you get from people who've lived like you in Gaza, or lived in Sudan, lived in Afghanistan, or lived in Europe as well, because Europe is a different place.
So I think what I saw again at like this dinner and these various dinners I go to, is that you have people who are positioning, but they're not taking positions, if you know what I'm saying.
I certainly do. And I guess my question now is positioning with whom and for what?
They don't know, but they're trying to figure out, okay, in opposition, what's the best avenue to get back to a Senate confirmed position like you had?
Well, okay, this is so interesting that you're raising this, because as you know, I have mentored a lot of people.
Yeah.
A lot of young people come and ask for advice, and I try to give it to them. And that to me is like the greatest thing I've done in my career, is to be able to identify people that I think are going to go places.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah.
But not necessarily go places because they're going to be in Senate confirmed positions, but are going to go places because they think and they have things to bring to the table. And
that they love a certain thing, and you want to lift them up.
And last week I had a lunch in Rehoboth with one such person who came to visit me. Says, I really want to come talk to you. I don't know you. I said, that's fine. And he said, I've done the Congress. I've done the worked with people in the cabinet. I've been in a university. I've worked in think tanks. What else should I do? I said, you're missing a piece. The piece you're missing is the NGO.
There you go.
You're missing living someplace for a couple of years and kind of understanding what it is the issues are, and what people think and what they think of their government, and whether they think like Americans do about what it is they want for their future and where they want to be. And sometimes, and some of that, is very different than we come from. And we've eliminated the whole idea of cultural understanding.
Yeah.
People just don't care anymore.
Yeah.
But that's so fundamental.
So I was going to ask you that question later, but that's your main advice to the next generation of people who want to go into doing what you did.
It is
get out there.
Yes.
And just experience something different and connect with people.
There are so many fantastic NGOs. The International Crisis Group, Refugees International, Doctors Without Borders. I mean, there's, Jose Andres. If you like to cook, go to the World Central Kitchen and do that. Learn what it is you're trying to make policy for and why.
Yeah. You know what you become? when you told me the story, somebody came down to see you in Rehoboth. We came down to see you in Rehoboth as well. You know who you become? Rudy De Leon.
That was the nicest thing anybody has ever said to me.
Sorry, shout out to our dear
Shout out to
Rudy. You were a key part of hosting his surprise party for his birthday, a big birthday. And remember, he has this thing, and Rudy, I know you listen to this thing and things like that. You got to write your book. Remember? And I do. The 10 rules that Rudy has for doing good while staying good in Washington, D.C. And I told him, you got to write this book.
He does. And Rudy De Leon, if anybody doesn't know, was the former Deputy Secretary of Defense and was an architect of some of the outstanding defense legislation when he worked in the Congress. And he's a very understated guy.
Yeah.
He's a very modest guy. I mean, he's the opposite of some of the blowhards you see, trying to get attention. And he and Bill Lynn were two of the most important people in my life, because rather than
who was Bill Lynn?
Bill Lynn was also a Deputy Secretary of Defense. I got to work with him when I was in my first iteration at the Pentagon, and they saw in me, I guess, something that other people didn't see. We connected on being interested in problems as they are and how to really solve them, and on how to communicate them. And he has been a mentor to me, and a wonderful
But the
human
formula
being.
that you just mentioned there, problems as they are, and how to connect and resolve them, then communicate with them.
That's right.
And that formula Lee Hamilton had. If anyone who worked for Lee Hamilton, and a bunch of people,
he did.
There's a bunch of people like Dennis McDonough, and Mara Rudman. I think Dan Restrepo. People might know that
he had the same.
You got to start with, how do you solve the problem, and then communicate.
That's right.
And what I worry about the current environment is people do the reverse. What do I say about this first? And then,
well, I think that's right. And it's interesting. I have respect for think tanks in a lot of ways,
especially the Middle East Institute.
But I tend to discount when the arguments on foreign policy tend to be between somebody's article and what somebody thought of the article, and they disagree with the article and all of that. That's not of interest to me. Of interest to me are things like, if Trump can get along with some autocrats, and he's made fun of by others, or not made fun of, but they toady up to him, but he doesn't get what he wants.
Yeah.
How do we deal with that? Because when Trump goes away, that's not going to go away.
Yeah. That's interesting. That's really interesting.
How do we operate in a communications environment that is now omnipotent? And is communications really the key? It is a key, but how do you make it not just the only thing anymore? And how do you tie communications to policy in a way where you get people to listen in the first 30 seconds of what it is you say, so that you have another 30 seconds and another minute and another 5 minutes to make your case?
Right.
How do you deal with disinformation? I mean, how do you bring trust back? These are all things that, to me, are fundamental to the discussion of the next part of foreign policy.
Brilliant. So one last question, and it is the last question. You gave your advice to people who want to follow in your footsteps, which is get out there, build connections, go out into the world, work with NGOs. There's not one path. What's your origin story? How the hell did you get into this, Doug? Take us back. And what was the
I got into this because I've always been interested in different people and how do you bring them together? What are the common threads? So I was interested in flags and embassies, and my parents took me to...
What year was this? Sorry.
Oh, God, I don't remember. 9, 10, 11, whatever. And they took me to Mexico City for a visit, and they were ready to kill me because, all the thing, what I wanted to see with the embassies, I wanted to go to all the embassies and get posters and flags. And then in high school, I took a course called World Cultures, which was taught by Ruth Harris and Lois Sorrell.
Lois. Okay.
Yes. People in your life who other people have never heard of but are very important to you. They were important to me, and it just, you studied about Islam and Buddhism and Christianity and all different kinds of cultures. And I thought, this is something I really want to do. And so I wanted to go into the Foreign Service, which I did. And I wanted to go to the Ivory Coast, and they sent me instead to Italy. And then I wanted to go to the Ivory Coast after that, and they sent me to London. And
Did you ever get to the Ivory Coast?
I never got to the Ivory Coast.
What are you waiting for?
Well, instead, I ended up getting a fellowship to work in Gary Hart's office.
Oh, nice.
And when I went there, you had to apply and sell the senator on why they should hire you. And he brought me in and he said, "How can you help me?" And I said, "Well, I know that you're interested in you're thinking about maybe running for president." And I said, "Do you know who would be in office in Britain if you were president?" He said, "No." I said, "I do." I said, "Do you know who'd be in office in France?" "No." "I do." And I said, "You know who'd be in office in Italy?" "I do." Because I had dealt with all of these rising young people because I've always been interested in the successor generation. Yeah. And he said, "You're hired."
There you go.
And that's why I did this.
Brilliant. Beautiful. So do like Doug has done in his life. You've done a lot of good. You've animated my world and spirit, and I appreciate the time you spent with us here. Thanks, Doug, for coming on.
Thank you for having me, and long live MEI. And let's get more of these Brian Catulus mugs
out there. Soon they'll be out in West Virginia at a flea market for 50 cents. That's all the time we have this week. Again, thank you to our listeners for tuning in and to our colleagues for their work on this. Ryan, Bailey, Athena, love the work you do with this here to make.
You're the ones who make this possible.
Yeah. You can follow MEI on X, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, and subscribe to our email newsletters for the latest analysis information about upcoming events. I'm Brian Catulus. We'll see you all very soon.